Snake Eyes is ruining Yu-Gi-Oh! Yeah, you heard me right, Snake Eye is ruining Yu-Gi-Oh! Basically, since the release of Snake Eye Poplar and Promethean Princess back in Phantom Nightmare, which was in February, Snake Eye has been essentially tier 0 or close to it for that entire period of time. But even then, Fire decks have been dominating Yu-Gi-Oh! Since essentially the release of the Fire King structure deck back in December. That's almost 6 months at this point. Now every few months we have people hopping on YouTube or Twitter claiming that Yu-Gi-Oh! Is dying or that the game is being ruined, and honestly, I've never actually felt that way until yesterday. Well, for you guys it's going to be Sunday, June 2nd, also known as Day 2 of YCS Indianapolis. How's it going everyone? My name is Matt and welcome to the channel if it's your first time around. I make competitive Yu-Gi-Oh! Videos to help everyone get better at the game. This includes guides on how to beat the best decks in the game, as well as in-depth reviews of the best strategies in Yu-Gi-Oh! So you know what to do or what not to do. So if you like that kind of content, then make sure to sub to the channel for more. But today I wanted to talk about the state of Yu-Gi-Oh! Today in 2024 and why Snake Eyes is ruining the game unlike any other deck in recent years. This comes down to a few key factors which I'll be addressing one at a time. But for those of you who think that there have been worse formats in Yu-Gi-Oh!'s history, don't worry, I'm going to talk about those formats too and explain why they're so much better than this current format that we're in right now. So sit back, relax, and enjoy the video because this is why Snake Eyes is ruining Yu-Gi-Oh! One of the best parts about Snake Eye is that it's able to play a ton of really incredible one-card starters in the strategy, and that's really good at boosting its consistency so it doesn't have to play cards like Pot of Prosperity or Pot of Desires. Cards like Snake Eye Ash and Poplar, Wanted and Diabellstar, Bonfire, and even Ostinato are essentially just one-card combos that allow the deck to go full combo. And to make matters worse, only 2 of those cards are even needed as normal summons for this combo. Now everyone's favorite deck would love to have a bunch of one-card starters just like Snake Eye. The problem is, it just isn't feasible to have 15 or so one-card combos that act as starters and extenders, all while having a bunch of other really powerful effects as well. And to top it off, all of these starters trade really favorably into hand traps. You need to find the right hand trap to deal with the right card in the right situation. For example, using Ash Blossom on a copy of Wanted most of the time just isn't going to be good enough. There are so many ways the deck can access original Sinful Spoils, and the fact that it can easily be put into the graveyard means that Wanted can use the effect to draw a card to essentially negate the card advantage that a player would get from using Ash Blossom on Wanted. Because of how many incredible one-card combos the deck has, the first turn kind of devolves to just, do you have as many or more hand traps as your opponent has starters? If yes, you're going to do pretty well, and if not, you're very likely going to struggle for a few reasons. The first reason is that the engine is incredibly small. In reality, this is what you can expect to see in the main deck of pretty much every single Snake Eye player. It only ends up being around 20 or so cards, which means that the rest of the deck is made up of a lot of other really powerful generic options. Those generic cards could be something like hand traps or board breakers to stop the opponent, but it can also be a smaller secondary supplemental engine that offers its own sets of challenges for the opponents. Some of the most popular secondary engines for Snake Eyes right now include Melodious, Kashtira, and of course, Fire King. Each of these 3 engines has their own starters which have to be addressed and don't conflict with Snake Eye in the slightest. Some of them even actually support the strategy incredibly well by offering more consistency or protection from hand traps. The best example of this right now is the Melodious engine. Now I've already done a deep dive on that engine and how it works, and if you want to see it, it's in the cards, but essentially resolving one singular copy of Ostinato gives the player 2 negates with Appaloosa, an omni-negate with Vortex Dragon, a search of any pyro monster thanks to Infernal Flame Banshee, a draw for turn, Pendulum Scales, and so on, all without using the normal summon. None of that conflicts with Snake Eye in the slightest, and it actually gives the deck more consistency even though you're adding in more bricks into the deck itself. But Yu-Gi-Oh! Has now evolved to the point where we need hand traps to play the game at the most optimal level. Looking back a few years ago, 6 to 9 hand traps was plenty, and now if you're playing 6 or 9 hand traps, you're playing a very small amount and honestly, suboptimally. Even when adding in a small Fire King, Melodious, or Kashtira package, Snake Eye can still incorporate 12 to 15 different hand traps pretty easily. When looking at the probability of opening 1 or more hand traps, it really becomes dependent on how many are in the main deck. If you have 6 or 9 hand traps, it's less than a 75% chance to have 1 or more in your starting hand. However, if we bump that number to 12, it's at least 85%, and at 15 it's over 90%. This means it's so much easier to stop your opponent, but you also don't lose out on any consistency because you have so many powerful one-card combos thanks to the Snake Eye engine. And that's the problem. An opening of 2 or 3 hand traps and 2 or 3 one-card starters is essentially the best possible opening hand you could have in Snake Eyes. And because of the ratio of engine to non-engine, the probability of opening that exact hand is going to be much higher than it had been in Yu-Gi-Oh's past. For example, Ishizu Tearlament, which is another Tier 0 format that is hated by a wide range of players. The problem is with Tearlament is that they had to incorporate so many engine pieces that did something when they hit the graveyard, whether they were tier names or Ishizu shufflers or whatever the case might be. In the case of Tearlament, they couldn't incorporate so many generic hand traps like Snake Eye can today. I'm not trying to say that Snake Eye is a better deck than Tearlament, that's a discussion for another day. But what I am trying to say is that Snake Eye, better than almost any other deck in the history of Yu-Gi-Oh!, uses specifically non-engine pieces to almost gatekeep certain decks from entering the format. If your engine isn't incredibly powerful or you can't fit in at least a dozen hand traps, you're not going to have very much success in this format. Now, while the main deck offers its own set of problems, one of the biggest issues when it comes to Snake Eye is going to be how generic and powerful the extra deck cards really are. Snake Eye can do pretty much anything it wants to with the extra deck thanks to how generic and unrestricted these cards really are. The biggest culprit of that is Promethean Princess, which is arguably the reason why fire decks are as dominant as they actually are. It does everything for fire decks, including Snake Eyes. It acts as an extender to revive back any fire monster, but that also usually turns into interruption because they revive back Snake Eye Flamber's Dragon. It offers its own form of disruption while it's in the graveyard, which can be doubled as a way to start extending on your opponent's turn and get resources from deck to hand. And of course, it also facilitates an easy OTK with Salmon Great Raging Phoenix and World Sea Dragon Zelantis. Its only restriction is that while it's on the field, you can't summon out anything other than fire monsters, which is laughable. The fact that so many non-fire decks are playing this card in tandem with the Raging Phoenix OTK just shows you that it doesn't make any sense for this card to even have that restriction. There's also, of course, SP Little Knight, which is arguably the best card in the game, Appaloosa for Monster Negation, and Hope Harbinger has also been seeing a lot of play, especially at YCS Indianapolis, as Spell Negate and also Attack Redirection. Now, while these 3 cards saw a lot of play at YCS Indianapolis, surprisingly, the Synchro package of Snake Eyes did not see very much play at all. That includes Bestial Dispatter and Cyframe Lord Omega for a double hand rip before the opponent can even do anything. The fact that Snake Eye can easily summon out a ton of really powerful generic extra deck boss monsters is a problem. But the issue with that is that you don't know which line they're going to go for. Are they going to go for a powerful Link line or a powerful Synchro line? Are they going to take advantage of generic rank 8 monsters or not? We don't really know until they actually do it. And the latest ban list got rid of 4 cards: Summon Limit, Linkuriboh, Borreload Savage Dragon, and Baronne de Fleur. Now, all 4 of these cards were seeing a ton of play in Snake Eye decks, with Linkuriboh, Borreload Savage Dragon, and Baronne de Fleur being critical pieces of what the end board tried to achieve. And yes, all 4 of these cards were banned because they're really good generic options, but they were also banned because they're pseudo hits to Snake Eye. By banning these 4 cards, we expected Snake Eye to take a significant step backwards when it comes to how good it actually was, but that wasn't really the case, because the drop off from the best extra deck cards to the second best extra deck cards wasn't as significant as we all thought it was going to be either. And that brings me to my next point. The ban list when it comes to these tier 0 decks or decks that are close to tier 0 status just don't do enough to even shake anything up. I get not wanting to hit the cards that just came out, but then Konami has to be more impactful with their decisions on what to ban or limit on each ban list. There's also a big debate on whether or not consistency hits are good for Yu-Gi-Oh! But you know what consistency hits are better than? Doing absolutely nothing. If we're going to sit here and play the format as is, versus sitting here and playing the format with Wanted or Snake Eye Ash or Bonfire all at one copy, I'm sure we'd all enjoy that format more than this one over here. For a deck to become really top tier, it needs to be very consistent. If it's not the case, it's going to have a hard time cracking into top cut multiple times over the course of its lifetime. To put this into perspective, Tearlaments came out in August of 2022 in Power of the Elements. In February 2023, 6 months later, we had a ban list getting rid of Tearlament Kikalos, but also limiting all the Ishizu Shufflers and Millers, and also all the relevant tier names as well. In 6 months, they addressed the entire Tearlament deck, and while it was still a very powerful option, it was significantly less consistent and didn't see as much play. The same could be said for Snake Eye if Ash or Wanted, Diabellstar, or any of the countless of possible 1-card starters were hit to 1 copy. But with the last ban list, Snake Eye didn't receive anything more than just a slap on the wrist. And that's even generous of calling it that, because the main deck is still essentially at full power. Without a real, significant change on the next ban list, Snake Eye is going to continue to be incredibly dominant, and honestly, even more so, because the new Fiendsmith archetype comes out in Infinite Forbidden, and that deck paired with Snake Eye is going to be absolutely devastating. In recent years, there have been many other decks that have led people to say that this format is ruining Yu-Gi-Oh! Or this deck is ruining Yu-Gi-Oh! For example, Tearlament, Kashtira, and Spiral, just to name a few. But these decks were nowhere near as bad as Snake Eye, and here's why. First off, Spiral. Spiral's first wave of Link support came in 2017 and led to a Tier 0 Spiral format, which was absolutely terrifying for those playing it. However, while it was incredible, the deck needed to play like 31 pieces of actual engine cards or consistency, which meant there were only 9 spaces for hand traps. And the hand traps back in 2017 just weren't as good as they are right now. The extra deck was also nowhere near as generic as it is today. Back in 2017, Link summoning was still in its infancy, and since then it's been 6 whole years of new Link monsters that have just made the game so much scarier. Kashtira was also a deck that was incredibly feared, but it wasn't feared because of the deck itself. It was more so feared because of this card, Kashtira Arise Heart. The second this card got banned, the playability and representation of the deck just went away almost overnight, and became less of a powerful combo deck and more of a going second I'm going to try and beat you with my big monsters deck. So it was less so of Kashtira being a problem and more so of Kashtira Arise Heart gatekeeping countless other decks in the format from seeing play because of its macrocosmos-like effect. And then is Ishizu Tearlament, which people will argue as being the greatest Yu-Gi-Oh! Deck of all time. And listen, I believe it's a fantastic deck and definitely the best deck ever, but that format was nowhere near as bad as this specific one that we're in right now, and here's why. Tearlament was much more reliant on variants, and to make sure that they were as consistent as possible, which is one of the most important things to do in Yu-Gi-Oh!, they had to fill their deck up with a ton of powerful effects that would activate in the graveyard. Maximize on their Ishizu Shufflers, maximize on their tier names, all these really important things needed to be done. But on top of that, it was a very skillful mirror match and a very skillful format. Knowing when or when not to use the effect of your millers was a critical thing, and knowing when to use your shufflers as well was also very important. In this specific format with all these Snake Eye cards running around, if you're going to sit there and just reveal your hand at the start of turn 1, if you have more hand traps than your opponent has starters, you have a really good chance of winning the game, and the same can't be said for Tearlament at all. Basically, Tearlament required so much more gameplay. Unless a player could actually activate the effect of Abyss Dweller, then it was pretty one-sided. But in this case with Snake Eye, it's just going to be who has more hand traps, that person usually wins. But don't get me wrong, Tearlament was an incredibly powerful deck and definitely wasn't good for Yu-Gi-Oh! It just wasn't as bad as this current format we're in right now is. But where do we go from here? Well, honestly, whenever we have a deck that's dominating like Snake Eye is right now, there's 2 ways for us to actually resolve that problem. The first of which is going to be with a ban list, and honestly that's not really going to be happening anytime soon because the last ban list on April 15th is less than 2 months old, which means we shouldn't be expecting one for another month, maybe even month and a half or 2 months, which is definitely problematic. And the second thing is going to be with power creep. There are countless decks in Yu-Gi-Oh! That have fallen by the wayside, not because they were hit on the ban list, but because new cards came out that made that strategy a lot less potent. The issue is we don't have a crystal ball and we can't say when that's going to happen for something like Snake Eye. But we do know it's coming in Infinite Forbidden. Sure, the new Tenpai Dragon cards coming in Infinite Forbidden are going to make that deck even more powerful, but is it going to be better than Snake Eye? It's hard to say. And then of course we have the new Fiendsmith cards as well, which are going to be extremely sought after. The problem is, while it's a very good and generic engine, you know what also can use it very effectively? Snake Eye. Yep, Snake Eye Fiendsmith is going to be one of the best ways to play Snake Eye in a couple of months, right before US Nationals. What I'm trying to say is that other than an emergency ban list, which I highly doubt is happening, Snake Eye isn't going anywhere. In fact, it's going to keep getting better. And that's the core issue here. There's no end in sight. We have no idea when this deck will actually be addressed, which is definitely a big problem. It's causing a countless number of players to take their hard-earned money and spend it elsewhere, either on maybe another TCG or just not at their local OTS, which is not good for anyone. and even some players are going to decide to no longer go to regionals or YCSs and spend the time to go to these events and really increase the game. If this continues, the attendance for Yu-Gi-Oh will start to decline, which is not good for our game in the slightest. I really hope we get an ban list to address this problem, but I'll be honest, I just don't trust that it's going to happen. And I say that full well knowing that I'm going to keep playing Snake Eye in this format because at the end of the day, I'm a competitive player and I try to win. But for the health and well-being of the game, I really hope we get a change. But let me know what you think down in the comments below. Is Snake Eye ruining Yu-Gi-Oh? And if it is, how would you try and fix it? If you like this style of video without the green screen, let me know down in the comments below. I'm trying a new style here and seeing if it'll work out and if you guys will enjoy it, so let me know down in the comments. And did you know that only 20% of my viewers are subscribed to the channel? So if you haven't already, subscribe to the channel for more amazing competitive Yu-Gi-Oh videos. Shout out to my channel members, your support is greatly appreciated and it goes directly to help the channel grow. Thank you all for watching, I hope you enjoyed it, and I'll see you all next time.